In 2016, archaeologists digging near the coast of Athens uncovered a human skeleton, then another, and another, until the trench was filled with them, 79 men, laid out in 3 long rows. Not in elaborate tombs, not with weapons, not with treasure. Many of them still had iron restraints corroded around their wrists. These men had not simply died together. Someone had controlled them, positioned them, and buried them together. Several of the skeletons showed injuries that appear to have happened around the time of death. One still had an arrowhead lodged in his chest. But no inscription said who they were, no grave marker explained what they had done, and no ancient historian ever described this burial. For years, one possibility seemed obvious. Maybe these were foreigners, invaders, captured enemies. Then scientists tested the chemistry locked inside their teeth, and the result made the grave much harder to explain. Almost every man they tested was local. Whatever happened here may have been Athenians doing this to other people from Attica. The men were found at Phaleron. Today, this area is swallowed by modern Athens. But in the Archaic period, Phaleron stood near the city's early access to the sea. And beneath this landscape lies one of the most important cemeteries ever excavated from early Athens. More than 2,000 burials have been discovered here. Children, adults, ordinary graves, cremations, people buried in jars, animals. And then there are the graves that do not fit. Some bodies were placed face down, some tightly flexed, others were clearly bound. The Esplanada group, the 79 men, is the most dramatic example. 3 parallel rows, young men, many still restrained. This was not how most people at Phaleron were buried. Someone had deliberately marked these men as different. Before they became a mystery, these were people. Most of the men examined were young adults, some were even younger. And despite the violence surrounding their burial, many of them appear to have been reasonably healthy. Their teeth were generally in good condition. There was no obvious shared epidemic, no clear sign that this was a group that had simply died from disease. What stood out instead was violence, fractures, restraints, and the arrowhead found with one of the bodies. But there is a frustrating limit to what bones can tell us. A broken bone can suggest trauma. It cannot tell you why the blow was struck. A shackle can tell you a man was restrained. It cannot tell you whether he was a criminal, a prisoner of war, a rebel, or simply on the losing side of a political fight. And Phaleron was buried during exactly the kind of century when those categories could become very dangerous. When people hear ancient Athens, they usually imagine marble temples, democracy, philosophers, Pericles. That Athens did not exist yet. The men at Phaleron lived centuries before the Parthenon we know today. This was archaic Athens, a society still working out who had authority. Power was concentrated among elite families. Political offices were dominated by aristocrats. Law itself was changing. And violent competition between powerful men was not unusual. The city-state that would later lecture the world about democracy was still learning how to govern itself. That matters because a grave containing dozens of restrained men does not require an invading army. It could come from inside the city, a faction, a rebellion, a failed seizure of power. And there is one event from this century that has followed the Phaleron skeletons since the moment they were uncovered. A failed coup led by a man named Cylon.
Cylon was not an obscure nobody. He was an Athenian aristocrat. And according to the ancient sources, he had won at the Olympic Games. That mattered. Athletic victory carried prestige, status, and political weight. Cylon also married into power. His father-in-law was Theagenes, the ruler of nearby Megara. Then Cylon decided that being influential in Athens was not enough. He wanted to rule it. Ancient accounts say he gathered supporters and attempted to seize the Acropolis. If the plan worked, Cylon could establish himself as tyrant. Instead, the city turned against him. Athenians from the surrounding countryside came in force. They surrounded the citadel. Cylon's supporters were trapped. Food ran low. Water ran low. Some were already dying. Cylon and his brother escaped. His followers did not. The surviving conspirators did something that should have protected them. They became suppliants. They took refuge at a sacred altar. In the Greek world, sanctuary was not a trivial technicality. To kill someone under divine protection risked pollution before the gods. According to Thucydides, the men were persuaded to leave after being promised they would not be harmed. They were taken away and killed. Some who tried to reach other altars were killed there as well. The act became infamous. The men responsible were branded polluted, accursed, and the scandal clung to their families for generations. Later traditions elaborated the story. One even said the suppliants held a thread connecting them to the goddess as they left the sanctuary. When the thread broke, their enemies claimed the protection had ended. Whether that detail happened exactly that way is impossible to know, but the core story is much older. Cylon tried to take power. His followers surrendered under sacred protection, and men connected to the Athenian authorities killed them anyway. You can see why archaeologists immediately thought of Cylon. The timing is broadly plausible. The setting is Athens. The dead are restrained young men. And the ancient sources remember a large group of political conspirators being killed after a failed coup. It almost fits too well. But archaeology has a dangerous rule. A story that fits is not the same thing as a story that is proven. No skeleton at Phaleron has Cylon's name on it. No ancient author tells us that his followers were buried here. And the dating of the graves is not precise enough to lock the two events together. The bodies could belong to Cylon's supporters, or to another episode of political violence that no surviving historian bothered to record. The original bioarchaeological team was careful. Their field observations could neither confirm nor disprove the Cylon theory. And then a different question emerged. What if the bodies could tell us where they came from? Your teeth begin recording information about your environment while you are young. One of those signals comes from strontium. Strontium exists naturally in rocks and soil. It enters plants. Animals eat the plants. Humans eat the plants and animals. And some of that chemical signature becomes locked into developing tooth enamel. Different geological regions can produce different strontium isotope patterns. So thousands of years later, researchers can compare the chemistry inside a person's teeth with the chemistry of the landscape. It does not give you an address. It cannot tell you what language someone spoke. But it can help answer a broad question. Did this person grow up around here, or somewhere geologically different? Scientists sampled 66 of the 79 men. And if the grave belonged to an invading foreign army, this was the test that might reveal it. The answer was overwhelming. 64 of the 66 tested men had strontium signatures consistent with Attica, 96.9%. The Esplanada group was not significantly different isotopically from the wider population buried at Phaleron. Most of these men appear to have grown up locally. That does not mean every one of them was born inside Athens. It does not tell us which political faction they supported. But it makes one simple explanation much harder to defend. This does not look like a grave filled mostly with people who had grown up in some distant foreign land. Science had answered one question and made the real one worse. If these men were mostly local, why were dozens of them restrained and buried together? Maybe they were rebels, maybe criminals, maybe members of a political faction, maybe captives taken during fighting between communities inside Attica, and maybe some explanation we have not even considered has disappeared completely from the historical record. What the isotope data does tell us is that the violence was directed largely at people whose residential histories looked much like those of everyone else buried nearby. This was not obviously violence against outsiders. It was violence within the same regional world. And that may be the most important thing about the grave. 79 restrained men require organization. Someone had to capture them, guard them, control them, move them, and dispose of their bodies. This was violence on a scale larger than one private argument. Some scholars now see graves like this as evidence for something changing in archaic Athens. Punishment was increasingly becoming something organized by public authority, rather than only by families settling disputes themselves. The same century that eventually produced written laws also produced graves like Phaleron. That does not mean the state was becoming more peaceful.
Sometimes the development of a state means becoming more efficient at deciding who can be punished. The 79 are famous because of their numbers, but they were not the only unusual dead at Phaleron. Across the cemetery, archaeologists have found other people buried in ways that mark them as different. Some restrained, some positioned unusually, some placed in mass graves. In one modern study, dozens of additional individuals were grouped into these exceptional burial contexts. That makes the Esplanada less like one bizarre event in an otherwise ordinary cemetery, and more like the largest surviving piece of a broader pattern. A society was deciding that certain people did not receive the same treatment as everyone else. We just do not know exactly what those people had done to be placed outside the norm. So, after 10 years of study, what can we actually say? We know 79 males were buried together in 3 rows. We know many were restrained. We know some suffered serious injuries around the time they died. We know the burial belongs to the violent political world of 7th century BCE Attica. And now, we know that almost every man tested appears to have grown up locally. What we do not know is harder. We do not know their names. We do not know the charge against them. We do not know whether they followed Cylon. We do not know who ordered their deaths. And despite all the injuries, we cannot reconstruct one single method of death for the entire group. The grave has become more specific. The mystery has not become smaller. For more than 2,600 years, these men had no voices. Archaeology gave us their bodies. Bioarchaeology gave us their injuries. And chemistry has now told us something about where they grew up. But none of it can tell us what happened on the day someone put them in chains. Maybe they were rebels, maybe prisoners. Maybe the victims of a political massacre remembered only indirectly in the stories of Cylon. We know more about the 79 men than we ever have before, and the strangest discovery is that they were probably not strangers at all. They were locals, which means somewhere in early Athens, people decided to do this to their own.